Okay, apologies for being slightly late. We just proved you couldn't get from Wellington to here by 8:30. Firstly, thank you for making the time to hear from us. I'm really just going to talk through some of the issues that arose in the report on the Canterbury earthquakes that we released last December. And I think it's really important to understand that this report is not a sort of a complete look back and sort of critical analysis of what's gone wrong and what's gone right. Part of it has been actually that there is nothing like this in the world in relation to human rights analysis of disaster recovery. This is the first time it's been all brought together, and I was in Geneva the week before last, and there's considerable international interest in this work. So, and a number of the standards that we refer to in this report actually only came in after the earthquake. So there's a lot of learning. One of the key things that we decided when the earthquake hit, we're dealing with the recovery really, was that we weren't going to sit back and wait 5 years to do some sort of inquiry into what went wrong. And this is very consistent with the guidance to human rights institutions, that it was really important for us to engage with affected people in particular, and people who could make a difference to their lives, and effectively not be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, or the people actually reporting on the ambulance, but trying to head off problems before they arose. So we've taken a very pragmatic and practical approach and advocated for the last 2 or more years really that people should be at the centre of the recovery process. And you can see examples of that in the report, from advocating for flexible settlement dates, insulation being installed during the repair process, the intervention in the Quake Outcast case. So all examples, and there's many more of ways in which the Commission has generally quite quietly intervened. So the report itself is a product of 2 years of working with the people of Canterbury, local government, the central government, tangata whenua, business and non-government organisations. And when I say non-government organisations, I include particularly what we call the pop-ups, the organisations that grew out of the earthquake and aren't necessarily even formally incorporated. They have been amongst the most valuable people that we've worked with. One of the things that we're really pleased to see over the course of the 2 years is that people have come to understand that this is New Zealand's greatest human rights challenge, and the government itself reinforced that in Geneva in the last couple of weeks, and I'll explain a little bit more about that, and also appreciation of how an approach of putting people first, people at the centre, and particularly involving the affected people in developing the solutions can actually improve both the outcomes of the solutions and certainly improve the psychosocial health of the people you involve. So I'm just going to very briefly brief you on the report and then let you ask me any questions you might have. So the first thing is the Commission's position is that the human rights issues surrounding the Canterbury earthquake are the greatest human rights issues facing New Zealand today. They're the sort of human rights issues that countries that have been in conflict or countries that are developing normally face, and we have them in the middle of a developed country. 2 weeks ago, when I was at the United Nations Periodic Review of New Zealand's Human Rights Record, the impact of the earthquakes and the recovery process was one of the themes raised, and there are as to what it should do. And Mr. Collins, in her response, was very clear of what she called the challenges in restoring recognised in New Zealand's human rights legislation and international obligations. And the major challenge that she referred to is the one we would agree with, which is the mental health. Human right, that is the right to health. There is a human right to health. And the other interesting area has really been around housing. Not only housing is housing, there is a right to an adequate house. In international human rights law, it's part of the right to an adequate standard of living. That doesn't mean the government has to give you a house. It means that the houses that are provided in the state are adequate as defined by international law, which includes things like habitability, affordability, security of tenure, and things like that. But the other side of it is perhaps even harks back to the 1840s and the confiscations that happened thereafter. Pākehā New Zealanders have understood what it means. We've had Pākehā New Zealanders coming to us and saying, does the Treaty of Waitangi apply to me? And so the issue of property rights has assumed a much more important situation with us as a result of the Canterbury earthquakes. That's been picked up by the Constitutional Review Panel, which was chaired by two red zoners, as you may know. And really that is about people being... what it's really about was best put to me by a red zoner, 80-year-old red zoner, who said, you know, I didn't realise before this earthquake why I bought my house, in the sense that I bought it so I could be free from interference from others. Now everybody is telling me what to do in my house and my home. So there's an aspect of one's home that is important to your human dignity and to your feeling of freedom, and a place where you can be yourself and you can be with your family without interference from people like us and others. So that's a really important thing to think about, is just how much home is related to dignity. The other thing I think that's very important to understand is that home, you have in your city one of the leading examples of reform of public health in the world, in the work being done by the Canterbury Health System. But that system is based around having people in their homes, not in the hospitals. So if their homes aren't adequate, if they're cold, old and mouldy, they will be sick. And we've just got to make sure that the system values the savings that are being made in the health system when considering the expenditure that should be made in the house system. So some of the things that you're doing around warrants of fitness now and other things are things that, you know, address these sorts of issues. We have been seeing, and I don't think it's any surprise to you, high levels of psychosocial harm. Where obviously the primary stressor for that is the earthquake, but the secondary stressors are acknowledged by both us and the government to be financial distress, unresolved insurance claims, and poor and insecure housing and community dislocation. Actually, the two chairs of the Constitutional Review put that really well in terms of the red zoners. About we forget that 95% of the support of any of us does not come from local government or national government and all the money and services they provide, but from our family and the community around us. And when that disappears, you notice it. And that's what the community dislocation is. And then if we've moved people out of communities, we've got to sort of relocate, you know, reconnect them with that support if they're going to survive. The critical thing, I suppose, is that so far a lot of money has gone into, in the last 12 months, begun to go into treatment of the consequences of psychosocial harm into the health system, into the education system and other places. The other thing to work on is trying to avoid the problem occurring. That's where a lot of our focus is, and a lot of everyone's focus is, in trying to actually stop the causes, improve or remove the stresses, deal with the financial stress, deal with the housing, deal with the insurance issues. And none of these issues are... The insurance issue is unusual in the sense that this was one of the most insured events in world disaster history. But these levels of psychosocial harm are seen after disasters. So it's not necessarily a human rights abuse that we're seeing high levels of psychosocial harm. I need to make that clear. We'll only be able to judge 5 or 10 years from now whether this is worse than might have been expected. Okay? The rights that are involved, just to quickly summarise them, are the right to adequate housing, the right to health, the right to property, the right to education, and civil and democratic rights about access to information and participation in decision making. The Commission has been involved since 2011 in working on the people-centred approach. We do see that if you put affected people at the centre of decision making and solution development, you get better services and stronger recovery for everyone. The report aims to share practical lessons from the recovery to improve the situation for affected residents and help for better decisions, better services and a stronger recovery for everyone. There are lots of positive examples. The difficulty of writing a report like this is to try and get the balance right between the good things that are going on and the things that need to be fixed. We've made 33 recommendations in the report to improve access to adequate housing, health services, and help business make a more proactive contribution to recovery. Some of those are for the future. So there was a bit of publicity at the time we made the report about the rent control suggestion. What that was really in the context of was saying, if you are going to have a situation where you have a mass movement caused by decisions you're making out of an area of people, so you have create housing demand, as it were, and you've got a movement of migrant workers in, there needs to be some work around understanding the economic consequences of that and what could be done to mitigate those consequences. And we were really saying that something like rent control is one thing that could have been considered in the past, but the horse has probably bolted. In terms of one of the things that really strikes you when you're working, and I'm sure it struck you, is that everybody involved in the earthquake recovery is working really, really hard and trying to do the right thing. And we include insurance companies, for example, in that list. But the analogy that best, I think, sums up the situation, which came from a senior executive in a bank, said it's like we're all in a swimming pool with about 30 lanes, with really big lane markers. And we're all swimming, sometimes different strokes, as fast as we can towards the end, which is to help the affected people. But the sum of the bits of the lanes doesn't equal the solution. And we've got to somehow break down those lanes in some of those areas and join the people working together to come up with better solutions. For example, banks have a longer term view of the world than insurance companies can have when they're dealing with the same customer. And so we are trying to encourage some of these silos to get together and work together on solutions to the problems that we see. We do think the council has an important part to play in leading that work. You know, I think helping remove the lane markers and bring the players together. We do see that good progress is being made on rebuilding the infrastructure, but we have a long way to go on the psychosocial recovery. And a lot of that is for the reasons I say. We believe the key is putting people at the centre of the recovery. And at the best, that's what it's been all about. And just two examples. I mentioned the DHB in the reorganisation of the health system, putting the house and the people in the house at the centre of that, and that's saving tens of millions of dollars already. Now, that would have had to have been done even if there hadn't been an earthquake. You know, we simply can't afford to put all our old people into care. We need to find other ways. But housing is part of the key. Another good example in services, which we appreciate that the City Council has been quite staunch when confronted with suggestions that services might be cut off, in pointing out that it has statutory obligations to provide services. So a good example of a services issue that has already been addressed was New Zealand Post. So New Zealand Post decided it couldn't provide services in the way it normally did in the red zone, consulted with the people in the red zone, and came up with different ways of solving the problem so people could get post. And that's the sort of approach, the individuated, talk to the people about what their needs are, come up with alternative solutions approach that is needed for going forward. One of our sort of key worries at the moment is we share concern that there are hundreds of people still stuck. And by stuck, we mean they just don't know what to do. And we support their idea that probably the solution is some sort of door-knocking effort by organisations like them, just to make absolutely sure before the winter that we've actually identified every vulnerable household. That has throughout the last 2 years been quite a revealing issue, and that in total the system doesn't know who the vulnerable people are. We just don't know. And that's certainly surprised me. But I understand that the system's fine. I've just heard the Privacy Commissioner talking as they're coming in here about the difficulties of information sharing in government and the relationship with privacy. But we've got to find out who these vulnerable people are before the next winter, and we've got to do everything we can to make good, even in temporary ways, their shelter. The other key issues, I suppose, that in addition to that one in front of us at the moment, we still are determined to see Christchurch meet that vision of being the most accessible city in the world. Disabled people are counting on that, and so far, with a few exceptions, we've seen good progress in that area. And the other area that's coming on us is migrant workers. This again was discussed in Geneva. New Zealand didn't sign the Migrant Workers Convention, Human Rights Convention, because we really didn't have any to worry about, but now we do. And we probably, even if we didn't sign the convention, we need to learn from those countries that have significant migrant workers in their place. So that's really a summary of the issues, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. You covered a lot of areas around vulnerable people and those psychosocial factors. You referred to two groups like CanCERN doing that work, and I think it's tremendous they are, and there are a small number of other groups who are doing that. Is this, and like, basically you're already saying, look, we don't know what we don't know about what is still going to hit us this year. So is that an area which perhaps our council and our community boards might also be able to be involved with, something like that door-knocking exercise that you referred to? Yeah,
I think it is. I just think there's a real opportunity for the council to lead. I mean, one thing I should have said too is we really appreciated what the mayor said about keeping the politics out and not playing political games with Christchurch. And that's, I think it's the council that can lead that. Aye.
I don't think anyone would disagree with what you said with regards to the problems and issues that people are facing in Christchurch. And look, I'm sure people are trying their hardest, insurance companies included in that, but I'd be very keen to know what you think or what you can do yourself and the Commission to actually put some pressure on those who can make a difference. I mean, I do take issue with the comment with regards to this being, the most insured country in the world, and this is a huge event and so forth. I mean, the Auditor General's report on EQC made it perfectly clear, as you will know, that the organisation was set up to handle such an event, and there is an expectation of a level of preparedness, and 3 years down the track to say we're the most insured country in the world and this is an unprecedented event is unacceptable. Yeah. So with all due respect to you, I do have an issue with that. So at what point can the Commission, knowing what it's done through all this work, actually say no? And maybe it's with government and local government and the Insurance Council and so forth and EQC. No, this isn't acceptable. Yeah. You need to pull your finger out. Yeah, well, I mean, firstly, we have been doing that, okay? We've been doing it quietly rather than in the media. And the responses have been, on the whole, good. But we're by no means there yet, and part of the problem there is the silo issue, which includes government silos as well as EQC and insurance company silos. But one of the interesting things I think has been how the sort of laggards and leaders have shifted around in the insurance industry over that time. So we know there's a commitment to do the right thing. I'm meeting one of the insurance companies today to see what is going on and try and understand why things aren't where they should be. So one thing we can do is point out to them, as we have done, that there are standards that they have to meet, and that we don't think they're meeting them, and make some suggestions about how. There's one of the problems with the sort of enforcement, if you like, side of this is that there are no sort of human rights litigation routes
in this business and human rights area. The whole area of business and human rights was stuck for decades in a battle between civil society and business over whether these things could be litigated or not. And in 2011, when they actually brought all these rules in, they effectively decided that they weren't going to be litigated. So there is a route through, which has been used actually by some of the insured people through the OECD guidelines, through the National Contact Point, which is MB, to complain that the businesses are not complying with their international obligations as regards business and human rights. But that's a long route, and what we're trying to do, as I say, is to continue to work away with the companies to get changes in behaviour. And I do think one of the next key steps is actually getting particularly the banks and insurance companies together to try and see whether we can't get things unstuck by having them work together. Yeah.
I'm just aware that we've actually reached the end of the time, but I found the presentation completely compelling, so I'm going to allow, I know there will be more questions,
Okay.
So I'm just going to allow a bit longer, being aware that we have got a time limit on our meeting. Do you do, by the way, are you doing public presentations so that people can hear what you just said? And
Yeah, well, I mean, we yes, is the short answer to that, so I'll keep it short.
Thank you for the presentation. I guess my concern is it's just it's gone to Geneva and everything, but that doesn't help our neighbours. That doesn't help out. What I really want to know is the meat and the sandwich. Do you, as a group within government, have some muscle to push things along? I mean, there must be documentation on every household affected by this earthquake held by either EQC or SERA or some government agency. You've mentioned that the council could have a lead role in door knocking. Surely, with all these agencies, it's just we're at a point now, it's 3 years, we're not a third world country, it's been going around and around, it's been appalling, to be quite honest. What is the next step? I mean, your analogy with the swimming pool is so correct. It's siloing, which should not be acceptable, full stop.
Yeah. I mean,
Thank you.
We met, I don't know now, I wouldn't like to say exactly how many months ago, but 6 to 8 months ago, with the 10 CEs of the social sector and Sarah and others, and had a real session about this is not acceptable. We need to join this up now. Our impression was that was happening, and we're now trying to find out exactly whether it has happened or not, because the CanCern suggestion would suggest it hasn't happened, right? So we need to sort of get back on the horse and look at that and try and find out, because it is unacceptable. We have to find a way, particularly in a way for if a council is going to lead, it needs to know what the information is. It needs to know where the people are.
Well, that's actually a very good point, because if we need to know that information, sometimes we're told we can't have it.
That's right.
So that's something that we've really got to get onto.
Yeah.
I think that, like checking up every 6 months, that's very quickly to go through 3 years, checking up every 6 months. So I think there's got to be government organisations are relevant of insurance companies, because they're private organisations. But if we're talking government or local government, they're areas that we can control. You can say it's...
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing that is going on every month, and has been going on for some time, is that the Auditor General, Ombudsman and I meet with the SSC to sort of try and bring the issues at that level, and they will bring in agencies to do it. So I think one of the things we could do probably better with the council is make sure that you can feed into that process, and vice versa, us come back to you and let you know what we see is going on. Yeah.
and so many of which we want to have dealt with. So we totally understand where you're coming from. What we want is solutions, and if you've got part of them and we've got part of them and other groups and individuals have got part of them, we want to put that all together so the lanes disappear in the swimming pool.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, actually, given the sort of the depth of knowledge that you've got on the subject, whether it's useful to sort of sit down with you for a couple of hours and just go through a program of what needs to happen.
Well, we're very happy to do that.
Okay, Yanni, last question.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of
Quick question.
going to my point. You've got this big report. There's a number of recommendations. It was done in December. Did you present this to the council, Hoodoo and council? I know there's recommendations here that reflect council. What I'd really love to see is a kind of list of the recommendations that you've made and what council should be doing.
Okay.
A chance to talk to our staff. I don't know if they've seen it.
Some of them have, yeah.
So has there been a response from them?
No, I mean, we haven't, it came late in December, and there hasn't been a sort of any sort of official response, but I actually think that's a good idea.
Okay, so
if we create a sort of council-centric version.
Yeah, and I think that would be really useful.
Yeah.
I also kind of wondered if you'd given the recommendations to government or Sarah and whether they had to respond or whether they've taken them on board.
Well, I mean, one of the things about the way we do reports is that we allow agencies and NGOs to see what we're saying about them if we're saying something. So many of the, it's always a bit of chicken and egg. Things get done ahead of, you raise an issue and it gets done, and so you're then reporting on what's actually positively happened. So there's a bit of that going on in the process as well.
Because I see in the report you talk about things like heritage, but you don't make any recommendations about going back to some sort of proper process. You talk about the appointed ECAN commissioners, but you don't make any recommendation around the right for people to vote.
Yeah, no,
seems pretty fundamental.
Yeah, no, in that regard, we
democracy.
Yeah, no, but we did.
Participation.
Yeah, we did at the select committee on the ECAN hearings quite strongly assert that issue and the need for contemporaries to elect their representatives.
But it should be. Was the recommendation a return to local democracy?
Yeah,
pretty fundamental.
Yeah. So we, that's something we've certainly said in that select committee process.
Thank you for the work you're doing, and I can't say how much I totally agree with what you're saying in terms of the human rights, and I just think the loss of democracy in our city is unfounded, unparalleled in New Zealand's history. Mm-hmm. So thank you for the work you're doing in that regard.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm just wondering, in terms of taking this further, because I sense that everybody will want to take it further, are you meeting with CCDU or Sarah while you're down here?
Not this time.
Okay.
We do meet regularly.
Okay. I'm just wondering if it would be sensible if we try to organise a meeting with you, the council, and maybe Sarah, or even though that doesn't quite put people at the front of the recovery, that meeting. Because I'd just like to explore what are the things that need doing. We know a lot of them, and all of what you've said just resonates incredibly well, but I'd just like us to sort of then allocate the tasks and get on with it, if that's something you're happy to look at. Yeah,
it is. And we had a discussion, we met the Mayor last week and had a discussion along similar lines. Yeah. That's okay. Thank you for your time.